Where's our overwatch? Commander Nathan Brooks shouted into the radio as tracer fire ripped across the canyon walls and turned the midnight darkness into flashing streaks of orange and white. The SEAL team moved fast between jagged rocks and broken terrain somewhere deep in the mountains of eastern Afghanistan, their boots sliding across loose gravel while dust filled the freezing night air. The operation had gone wrong less than 8 minutes after insertion. What was supposed to be a quiet extraction mission had become a trap the second their convoy route was compromised. Brooks dropped behind a boulder as another burst of enemy fire slammed into the cliff above his head, sending pebbles raining down across his shoulders. Falcon 2, report, he barked. We lost visual on the north ridge, the voice answered through static. Movement everywhere. Another SEAL crouched beside Brooks, breathing hard beneath his helmet. Chief Mason Reed was one of the toughest operators in the unit, a broad-shouldered veteran with 12 deployments behind him, but even he looked tense now. They're herding us deeper into the canyon, Mason said quietly. This was planned. Brooks looked up toward the ridge line towering nearly 300 feet above them. Small flashes flickered in the darkness. Whoever had set up this ambush knew the terrain perfectly. The enemy controlled the high ground, and every escape route was narrowing by the second. Somewhere behind them, a radio operator struggled to re-establish drone support, but the sandstorm moving across the valley had swallowed most of their signal. Air support was grounded. Satellite coverage was fading. And the only overwatch assigned to their mission was a woman most of the team barely trusted. The new girl froze, one of the younger operators muttered while checking his rifle magazine. I knew this was a mistake. Brooks said nothing. Earlier that afternoon, during mission briefing, the atmosphere inside the operations tent had been tense the moment Evelyn Carter walked in carrying her sniper case. She had been quiet from the start. No swagger. No stories. No attempt to impress anyone. At 5'5" with pale skin, tied-back blonde hair, and a calm expression that barely changed, she looked nothing like the hardened combat snipers most SEAL teams were used to working with. Some of the operators exchanged glances immediately. Others didn't bother hiding their skepticism. That's our overwatch, one man whispered under his breath. Another laughed softly while sipping coffee beside the tactical map. Hope she shoots better than she talks. Evelyn never reacted. She simply set her gear down beside the wall and listened to the mission briefing without interrupting once. Commander Brooks had reviewed her file only briefly before deployment. Transfer from another classified unit. Extensive long-range certifications. No social profile. No photographs in the archive older than 6 years. Half her service record had blacked out sections that required special clearance to access. That alone should have told him something. But in elite units, silence often created suspicion faster than respect. Especially when someone new arrived without explanation. Back in the canyon, another round cracked overhead. A nearby rock exploded into dust beside Mason's shoulder. Sniper, someone yelled. Instantly, the SEAL team dropped lower against the terrain. The enemy marksman was good. Precise. Patient. He wasn't firing wildly. He was controlling movement. Controlling fear. Brooks keyed his radio again. Raven 1, respond. Only static answered him. A younger SEAL cursed under his breath. Told you. She's gone. Brooks narrowed his eyes toward the darkness above them. Somewhere out there, hidden among the cliffs and shadows, Evelyn Carter was supposed to be covering their movement from a high overwatch position nearly a mile away. But nobody had heard from her in over 6 minutes. In combat, 6 minutes felt like forever. Another enemy burst pinned the team behind cover again. One operator slid beside Brooks while clutching his shoulder. Sir, we stay here much longer, we're boxed in. Brooks knew he was right. The canyon walls were tightening ahead, and enemy movement on thermal scans showed figures slowly repositioning above them. They were being funneled exactly where the ambushers wanted them. The commander took one slow breath and looked toward the ridge line again. The darkness felt alive now. Watching them. Waiting. Then suddenly, the radio crackled. A calm female voice cut through the static like ice. "Commander Brooks," she said softly. "I have visual." Every man froze. Brooks immediately grabbed the radio. "Raven 1, report your position." A brief pause followed. Then her voice returned, steady and emotionless. "Negative on position disclosure. You need to move your team 30 yards east. Enemy machine gun nest is preparing to lock your exit route." Mason frowned beside him. How the hell can she even see that? Before Brooks could answer, Evelyn spoke again. "Move now." Something about her tone silenced every doubt in the canyon. There was no panic in her voice. No hesitation. Just certainty. Brooks gave the signal immediately. "Move east. Go." The SEAL team sprinted low across the rocks as enemy fire erupted again from above. Dust exploded around them while shadows shifted along the cliffs. Then it happened. One single rifle shot echoed across the canyon. Deep. Distant. Controlled. The enemy machine gun instantly went silent. No second shot followed. No dramatic reaction. Just silence rolling across the mountain air. Several SEALs stopped mid-step and stared toward the ridge. Even the enemy fire seemed to pause for half a heartbeat. Mason slowly looked toward Brooks. "That wasn't luck," he whispered. High above the battlefield, hidden somewhere in the freezing darkness beyond the canyon walls, Evelyn Carter chambered another round without saying a word. The canyon remained silent for less than 3 seconds before enemy fire erupted again from the ridge line, sharper now, more aggressive, as if whoever controlled the ambush had finally realized there was another shooter in the mountains. Commander Nathan Brooks pressed himself against the cold stone while dust drifted through the freezing air around his team. The wind had picked up hard from the west, carrying sand across the narrow pass and reducing visibility with every passing minute. Somewhere high above them, Evelyn Carter was still watching. Still calculating. Still invisible. "Raven 1, give me eyes on enemy movement," Brooks ordered into the radio while signaling his operators forward. Her response came instantly. 3 shooters repositioning North Ridge. 2 more approaching from the eastern shelf. You have 90 seconds before they close your escape corridor. Brooks exchanged a quick look with Mason Reed. 90 seconds was not enough time to reorganize a trapped SEAL team inside a canyon under crossfire. But the calm confidence in Evelyn's voice was beginning to affect everyone listening. She did not sound afraid. She sounded prepared. Another rifle report echoed across the valley. One of the enemy firing positions instantly went dark. Then another. The rhythm of the battlefield started changing. The pressure on the SEAL team eased just enough for Brooks to move his men behind a cluster of broken rocks near the canyon wall. "How far out is she?" one of the younger operators whispered while checking the darkness above them through his night vision goggles. Mason shook his head slowly. "Farther than any of us can probably shoot." Brooks keyed the radio again. "Raven 1, what weapon system are you running?" A brief pause followed. "Modified MAR-AD platform chambered in 300 Norma Magnum," Evelyn answered. "Suppressed." The younger operator stared in disbelief. "There is no way she is making those shots in this wind." Brooks looked toward the ridge again. Deep down, he was starting to realize something uncomfortable. They had all underestimated her before the mission even started. Back at the firebase hours earlier, Evelyn had sat alone outside the armory while the rest of the SEAL team prepared gear and joked near the transport vehicles. She had methodically cleaned her rifle beneath a dim yellow maintenance light without speaking to anyone. Most of the operators barely acknowledged her existence. One had laughed quietly after noticing how small she looked carrying the oversized sniper case across the compound. Another questioned why Command assigned a quiet analyst to overwatch a live extraction mission. Evelyn never reacted to any of it. She simply checked her optics, confirmed her ballistic charts, and loaded her magazines with the same calm focus she carried now in the mountains above them. Brooks remembered stopping near her before departure. "You good up there alone?" he had asked casually. Evelyn glanced up only briefly. Her pale blue eyes looked strangely steady beneath the harsh floodlights. "I prefer working alone, sir." That was all she said. No confidence. No ego. No attempt to prove herself. At the time, Brooks assumed she lacked experience around SEAL teams. Now he was beginning to question everything. Movement, someone yelled suddenly from the canyon edge. Several enemy figures emerged along the eastern ridge, spreading fast across elevated terrain. They were trying to cut off the team before extraction could arrive. Brooks immediately raised his rifle while Mason coordinated defensive positions behind the rocks. Then Evelyn's voice returned through the comms. "Do not engage." Brooks frowned. "Say again." "Conserve ammunition," she said calmly. "I have the ridge." Another suppressed shot echoed across the valley. One enemy silhouette disappeared instantly into the darkness. Then another. The remaining figures scrambled for cover, clearly confused by the angle of attack. The younger SEAL beside Brooks lowered his weapon slightly. "How is she even tracking them?" Mason answered quietly without taking his eyes off the ridge. "Because she already knew where they would move before they got there." The canyon wind intensified again, screaming through the rocks while loose sand scraped across helmets and gear. Even with thermal optics, visibility was collapsing fast. Yet Evelyn continued firing with impossible consistency from somewhere nearly a mile away. No wasted shots. No panic. Every movement she predicted unfolded exactly the way she described over comms seconds earlier. Brooks finally understood why her service file looked classified beyond reason. This was not normal sniper work. This was years of battlefield instinct sharpened into something almost mechanical. "Commander," Evelyn said softly through the radio, "enemy technical vehicle entering the south trail. They are preparing to lock the canyon exit." Brooks checked his tactical display. The southern route was their only remaining escape path until extraction arrived. "Can you stop it?" he asked. Silence lingered for 2 long seconds while wind roared through the mountains. Then Evelyn answered with the same calm tone she had used all night. "Already adjusting." High above the battlefield, hidden somewhere beyond the collapsing storm clouds and black stone ridges, Evelyn Carter slowed her breathing and steadied the rifle against the frozen earth beneath her. Through the scope, the distant headlights of the approaching vehicle bounced across the canyon floor nearly 2,300 yards away. The crosswind had shifted 6 miles per hour since her last shot. She adjusted for it without hesitation. Far below, the trapped SEAL team waited in silence while the enemy convoy rolled closer through the darkness. Then the canyon echoed once more with the sound of a single suppressed rifle shot. The suppressed rifle shot rolled across the canyon like distant thunder, and less than 2 seconds later the headlights from the approaching technical vehicle suddenly veered sideways before disappearing behind a cloud of dust and rock. The engine noise faded almost immediately. No explosion. No dramatic fireball. Just silence. Commander Nathan Brooks stared toward the southern trail through the darkness while every member of the SEAL team froze in disbelief. Mason Reed slowly lowered his rifle. "She hit the driver," he said quietly. Brooks keyed the radio at once. "Raven 1, confirmed target neutralized." Evelyn Carter answered with the same calm voice she had carried all night. "Vehicle disabled. You have approximately 4 minutes before enemy reinforcements reorganize." Brooks exhaled slowly and motioned his operators forward again. "Move now. Stay low." The team pushed deeper along the eastern side of the canyon while sand continued sweeping through the valley in thick waves. The weather was turning worse by the minute. Visibility dropped below 50 yards in some areas, and the freezing wind cut through gloves and tactical gear like knives. Yet despite the chaos surrounding them, every instruction Evelyn gave over comms remained precise. 3 hostiles behind the broken ridge at your 11 o'clock. Do not use the center trail. Watch the upper shelf above the canyon split. It was as if she could see the entire battlefield from above while everyone else stumbled through darkness nearly blind. The younger operator who had doubted her earlier finally shook his head in disbelief. How long has she been doing this? Mason glanced toward Brooks before answering. Longer than any of us probably know. Ahead of them, the canyon narrowed into a jagged passage barely wide enough for 2 men side by side. Brooks immediately disliked it. The walls rose nearly straight up on both sides, creating the perfect choke point for another ambush. Raven 1, he said into the radio, talk to me. Static crackled briefly before Evelyn replied. Thermal scan shows movement on the western cliff above your position. Possible spotters. Brooks stopped instantly and raised a fist. The team halted behind him. Can you clear it? He asked. There was a short pause. Then Evelyn answered softly, already done. Somewhere high above them another faint suppressed report echoed through the storm. The operators exchanged uneasy looks now, not because they feared her, but because they were beginning to understand how far beyond normal she really was. Brooks remembered reviewing mission assignments back at headquarters 48 hours earlier. He had questioned command directly after seeing Evelyn attached to his operation. You are assigning 1 sniper for overwatch on a canyon extraction, he had asked. The intelligence officer merely slid a classified folder across the table. She is enough. Brooks had opened the file expecting pages of tactical certifications and deployment records. Instead, nearly every line had been blacked out. Entire operations removed. Names deleted. Locations erased. The only visible details were fragments. Long-range reconnaissance. Joint Special Activities Command. Confirmed operational success rate 97%. 1 line near the bottom remained untouched. Psychological evaluation, exceptionally calm under pressure. At the time, Brooks assumed command was exaggerating her importance the same way military leadership often did with specialized assets. But now, trapped in a freezing canyon while a hidden sniper quietly controlled the battlefield from over a mile away, he realized the file probably hid far more than it revealed. Commander, Evelyn said suddenly through comms, interrupting his thoughts. You have enemy movement approaching from the northern ridge again. 6 individuals. They are attempting to flank your rear. Brooks immediately turned toward Mason. Set rear security. The operators shifted positions smoothly despite exhaustion, rifles aimed toward the dark cliffs behind them. For several seconds nothing moved except blowing sand. Then one faint silhouette appeared along the ridge line overhead. Before anyone else could react, Evelyn fired again. The figure instantly disappeared back into the darkness. Another moved seconds later. Another shot followed. Calm. Efficient. Almost unreal. The younger SEAL beside Brooks finally whispered the question everyone was thinking. How far away is she? Brooks checked the tactical coordinates on his wrist display and looked toward the mountains towering above the canyon. At least 1.3 miles, he answered quietly. The operator stared at him. In this weather? Brooks nodded once. Nobody spoke after that. Ahead of them, a faint green signal light suddenly blinked through the storm. Extraction point. The team had almost reached the evacuation zone. Relief spread briefly across several exhausted faces until Evelyn's voice cut through the radio again, sharper this time. Stop moving. Every operator froze instantly. Brooks pressed against the canyon wall. What do you see? Several seconds passed before she answered. Tripwire. Mason's eyes widened beneath his helmet. The team scanned the rocky path ahead until finally one operator spotted it stretched low between two stones nearly invisible beneath the drifting sand. "Good catch," Brooks muttered. "No," Evelyn replied quietly through the radio. "That was not for you." Brooks frowned. "What does that mean?" High above the canyon, hidden beneath layers of camouflage netting and stone, Evelyn adjusted her thermal optics slightly and focused on movement nearly 800 yards behind the SEAL team. 3 unfamiliar heat signatures were descending the ridge with disciplined spacing and controlled pacing. They moved nothing like local fighters. No wasted movement. No panic. No hesitation. Evelyn's eyes narrowed slightly for the first time all night. Then she spoke into the radio with a tone Commander Brooks had not heard before. "You have company." Commander Nathan Brooks immediately dropped behind the canyon wall as the wind screamed through the narrow passage around them. Every operator in the SEAL team shifted into defensive positions without needing another order. The exhaustion in their movements was obvious now. They had been under pressure for nearly 40 minutes, navigating freezing terrain while enemy forces slowly tightened around them from every direction. But something in Evelyn Carter's voice had changed. Until now she had sounded calm, detached, almost emotionless. This time there had been tension beneath her words. "Define company," Brooks said quietly into the radio while scanning the darkness behind them through his night vision optics. Several long seconds passed before Evelyn answered. "Not local fighters." Mason Reed exchanged a quick look with Brooks. "What does that mean?" Brooks asked. "Disciplined movement patterns. Coordinated spacing. Advanced equipment signatures," Evelyn replied. "They are hunting you." The younger operator beside Brooks swallowed hard beneath his headset. "How many?" "3 confirmed. Possibly 4. Brooks checked the remaining ammunition across his team while cold air drifted through the canyon. They were already low on supplies. Drone support remained offline. Extraction had not checked in for the last 6 minutes. And now another unknown group was descending into the valley behind them. "Can you identify them?" Brooks asked. Silence followed again. Then Evelyn spoke quietly. "No insignias. Thermal masking gear. Suppressed rifles. They move like professionals." Mason frowned. "Private contractors?" "Negative," Evelyn answered instantly. "Better." The wind intensified above the canyon, carrying loose sand through the darkness while distant rocks shifted somewhere high along the ridge. Brooks had spent almost 15 years operating in hostile environments, and he knew exactly what Evelyn meant. Some groups moved with confidence because they had training. Others moved with silence because they had experience. The people following them now sounded like the second kind. "We need extraction now," one operator whispered. Brooks keyed the radio to command frequency again. "Falcon Base, this is Ghost Actual requesting emergency extraction update." Only static answered him. The storm was killing every long-range signal. They were alone. High above the canyon floor, nearly 1.5 miles away, Evelyn Carter remained motionless beneath layers of camouflage netting stretched between broken rocks. Snow dust mixed with sand across the mountainside around her while the freezing temperature dropped lower by the minute. Through the thermal optic mounted above her rifle, the battlefield unfolded in glowing shades of orange and red. She tracked the 3 unknown figures moving steadily down the western ridge toward the trapped SEAL team below. Their pacing remained perfectly controlled despite the terrain. No wasted motion. No hesitation. One of them briefly stopped behind a cluster of rocks and scanned the valley using thermal optics of his own. Evelyn narrowed her eyes slightly. "They know where I am supposed to be," she said quietly into the radio. Brooks looked up instantly. "What?" "They are checking elevated sniper positions first." Mason stared toward the darkness above them. "You think they came for you?" Evelyn did not answer immediately. The silence itself was enough. Back at the firebase 3 days earlier, she had arrived under heavy security shortly after midnight. No welcoming briefing. No introduction to the unit. Just a sealed transfer order and direct assignment to Commander Brooks's operation. Most of the SEALs barely noticed her during equipment prep. But one man had. Senior Intelligence Officer Daniel Mercer had stepped outside the command building the moment Evelyn crossed the compound carrying her rifle case. His expression had changed immediately. "I thought she retired," he had whispered quietly to another officer near the doorway. Evelyn heard him. She heard everything. Yet she kept walking without reacting. Later that same night, Mercer approached Brooks privately near the operations center. "You should know something about Carter," he had said carefully. "Then tell me," Brooks replied. Mercer hesitated before shaking his head. "Actually, maybe it is better if you learn during the mission." At the time, Brooks thought the comment sounded dramatic and unnecessary. Now trapped inside a freezing canyon while unidentified hunters tracked both his team and their sniper through the mountains, he finally understood why Mercer looked nervous. "Raven 1, Brooks said into the radio, "you have worked against these people before?" The wind howled through the comms for a moment. Then Evelyn answered softly. "Once." Mason immediately noticed the difference in her tone. For the first time all night, there was no certainty in it. Only memory. Down in the canyon, one of the SEAL operators suddenly raised a hand toward the ridge above them. Movement. Everyone froze. A faint silhouette appeared briefly between the rocks nearly 300 yards away before vanishing again into the darkness. Brooks steadied his rifle. "Do not engage unless confirmed," he ordered quietly. The unknown group was close now. Too close. Evelyn adjusted her thermal optic again and tracked the lead figure through blowing sand. He moved with remarkable discipline, using terrain shadows perfectly while staying nearly invisible against the freezing rock surface. Whoever he was, he understood sniper warfare. Then the man stopped suddenly and turned his head directly toward Evelyn's hidden position high above the valley. Even at extreme range, she could feel it immediately. He knew. "Commander," she said quietly into the radio, "you need to move your team now." Brooks frowned. "Why?" The answer came instantly. "Because they finally found me." At that exact moment, somewhere high across the canyon ridge, a distant suppressed rifle shot cracked through the freezing night air and slammed into the rocks barely 2 feet from Evelyn Carter's concealed position. The rifle impact against the rocks above Evelyn Carter's position sent fragments of stone scattering across her camouflage netting while the echo rolled through the frozen mountainside. She did not flinch. Her breathing remained slow and controlled as she immediately shifted 2 feet lower behind the ridge and adjusted her thermal optic toward the western slope. The enemy shooter had found her at extreme range through a sandstorm in total darkness. That alone told her everything she needed to know. "Raven 1, status," Commander Nathan Brooks demanded through the radio below. Evelyn chambered another round smoothly. "Still operational." Another suppressed shot cracked across the canyon, this one even closer than before. The unknown sniper was correcting fast. Too fast. "Move your team south immediately," Evelyn said calmly. "You have less than 2 minutes before they cut off extraction." Brooks signaled the operators forward without hesitation. At this point nobody questioned her anymore. The younger SEAL who had mocked her before deployment now moved exactly where she instructed without speaking a single complaint. Fear had replaced doubt. Not fear of Evelyn, but fear of whatever kind of people could track someone like her through a storm at nearly 1.5 miles away. The team pushed through the narrow canyon while freezing wind tore across the rocks around them. Ahead, the faint green extraction marker blinked weakly near the landing zone hidden between 2 cliff walls. It was close enough to feel possible now. But Brooks could sense the tension rising through every radio transmission. Evelyn was no longer controlling the battlefield uncontested. Somewhere in those mountains another sniper was matching her shot for shot. High above them, Evelyn adjusted her rifle against the frozen earth and scanned the western ridge again through thermal view. The unknown shooter had disappeared completely after the second shot. Professional. Patient. Dangerous. Most snipers made mistakes after taking aggressive shots at long range. They rushed repositioning. They exposed heat signatures. They chased confirmation. This shooter did none of those things. He vanished immediately after firing. Evelyn narrowed her eyes slightly. She had only met one unit in her career trained to operate like that. Her radio crackled softly again. Raven 1, Brooks said, "Who are these people?" The wind roared through the mountains for several seconds before she answered. "A ghost team." Mason Reed frowned while moving beside Brooks through the canyon floor. "What the hell is a ghost team?" Evelyn remained silent briefly, as if debating how much to say. Then she answered quietly. "Off-grid operators used for missions governments deny exist." Brooks glanced back toward the dark ridges towering above them. "You worked with them?" "No," Evelyn said softly. "Against them." Another suppressed shot suddenly struck the canyon wall less than 20 yards ahead of the moving SEAL team, forcing everyone down behind cover instantly. The unknown sniper was not aiming to eliminate them. He was hurting them. Testing their reactions. "He is pushing you toward the center trail," Evelyn warned immediately. "Do not take it." Brooks checked the terrain map mounted to his wrist. The center trail led directly to the extraction zone. "That is our only route." "Not anymore." Evelyn shifted her optic lower toward a cluster of rocks nearly 600 yards east of the canyon path. Thermal signatures glowed faintly there beneath heavy camouflage. Charges. Hidden explosives buried under loose stone. Her expression hardened slightly. They mined the extraction corridor. Brooks stared at the map for one stunned second before looking toward Mason. "She just saved all of us again." The team immediately redirected east through a tighter section of terrain while sand and snow mixed together in the freezing wind. Every operator moved faster now despite exhaustion because the truth had finally settled over them. Without Evelyn Carter, none of them would leave the canyon alive. Back at the firebase, Brooks remembered one strange detail from mission prep that made sense only now. Before deployment, Evelyn personally requested elevation maps covering nearly 20 miles beyond the official operation zone. At the time, Brooks thought she was being overly cautious. "The mission area is only 4 miles wide," he told her. Evelyn had calmly folded the maps and answered without emotion. "Threats never stay inside mission boundaries." Brooks understood now that she had not been preparing for local fighters. She had been preparing for hunters. Another rifle shot echoed across the canyon. This one came from much closer. Evelyn immediately shifted lower behind the ridge as a third round clipped the edge of her position and disappeared into darkness. He was closing distance while firing in near zero visibility. Impossible for most shooters. Not impossible for him. Evelyn finally spotted a faint thermal distortion moving across the western ridge nearly 1,400 yards away. A single figure. Slow. Precise. Deliberate. The man paused briefly behind a rock formation and turned directly toward her position again. Even through thermal haze and blowing sand, she could feel the intent behind the movement. Recognition. He knew exactly who she was. "Commander," Evelyn said quietly into the radio. "Your extraction delay was not accidental." Brooks slowed beside the canyon wall. "Explain." Her eyes never left the moving figure in her scope. "This mission was bait." Silence spread across the comms instantly. Mason stopped moving altogether. "Bait for who?" Brooks asked. Evelyn finally answered in a colder voice than before. "Me." Down below, the SEAL team exchanged stunned looks while the storm howled around them. None of them understood why anyone would build an entire ambush operation around a single sniper. But high above the canyon, the unknown figure suddenly stopped again and raised his rifle directly toward Evelyn's concealed ridge. Then for the first time all night, Evelyn Carter whispered something no one expected to hear. He is still alive. The freezing wind tore across the canyon as Commander Nathan Brooks stopped behind a wall of broken stone and stared into the darkness above him. Around the SEAL team, the storm continued swallowing visibility one gust at a time. Nobody spoke for several seconds after Evelyn Carter's words echoed through the radio. He is still alive. The sentence lingered over the comms like a warning from another world. Mason Reed finally broke the silence first. Who is alive? High above the battlefield, Evelyn remained perfectly still behind her rifle while thermal distortion shifted through her optic. The distant figure across the western ridge had disappeared again, but she already knew exactly where he moved next. The problem was not tracking him. The problem was understanding why he had come back after all these years. Raven 1, Brooks said carefully, talk to me. Evelyn exhaled slowly into the freezing air. His name is Viktor Sokolov. Mason frowned immediately. The ghost wolf? Brooks turned toward him. You know that name? Mason nodded once. Every sniper school in the military knows that name. The younger operators nearby exchanged uneasy looks. One of them lowered his rifle slightly. I thought he was dead. Evelyn answered before Mason could speak. So did I. Another distant suppressed rifle shot cracked across the canyon and slammed into the rocks above Evelyn's position again, forcing her to shift lower against the ridge. Even now, Victor was not rushing his shots. He was controlling tempo. Controlling pressure. Testing reactions. It was sniper warfare at the highest level possible. Brooks keyed the radio again while his team continued moving carefully through the eastern trail toward the alternate extraction zone. Who exactly is this guy? This time Evelyn stayed silent longer than usual. The wind howled through the comms while snow dust swept across the mountainside around her. Finally she answered in a colder voice than before. 6 years ago, a joint covert unit was deployed near the Russian border during a black operation that officially never happened. Mason immediately stopped walking. He already knew where this story was going. Evelyn continued. We were tasked with intercepting a weapons transfer before it crossed into hostile territory. The mission failed before we reached the target. Brooks listened carefully while guiding his operators through the canyon. What happened? Evelyn adjusted her thermal optic toward the western ridge again. Someone leaked our position. Back then she had been 27 years old, already considered one of the most gifted long-range shooters in classified operations. Her team called her Phantom because she rarely missed and almost never spoke during missions. But the operation near the border changed everything. The ambush came at night during a blizzard. Communications failed first. Then extraction disappeared from radar. One by one, her team vanished into the storm while enemy shooters tracked them from elevated positions they should never have known about. Evelyn survived only because she separated from the main group and climbed nearly 2,000 feet into frozen terrain carrying a damaged rifle and limited ammunition. She remembered the silence most of all. No radio chatter. No helicopters. No rescue. Just snow and darkness stretching forever across the mountains. Then she saw him for the first time. Viktor Sokolov. Watching her through a scope from nearly a mile away. He killed everyone on my team, Evelyn said quietly into the radio. The canyon fell silent again except for the wind. Brooks glanced toward Mason, whose expression had completely changed now. There was no skepticism left in any of them anymore. Only understanding. Command said the entire Ghost Recon unit was wiped out during a border incident, Mason said softly. That was your team? Evelyn did not answer directly. She did not need to. The younger SEAL beside Brooks looked stunned. Wait. Ghost Recon Phantom? Mason nodded slowly. That was her call sign. The operator stared toward the mountains above them as realization settled over him. All night they had been questioning a woman whose story already existed inside classified military legends. Brooks finally understood why her records had been erased. Why intelligence officers looked nervous around her. Why command assigned an entire SEAL extraction mission around a single sniper. Evelyn Carter was never ordinary Overwatch. She was the survivor of an operation so catastrophic the government buried it completely. Raven 1, Brooks said quietly, why would Sokolov come after you now? Evelyn's eyes locked onto a faint thermal shimmer moving between rocks across the western ridge nearly 1,300 yards away. Victor was repositioning again. Slowly. Patiently. Hunting. Because he thinks he failed 6 years ago, she answered. Another suppressed shot suddenly cracked through the storm and struck directly through the edge of Evelyn's camouflage netting, tearing part of it loose into the freezing wind. This time the round came dangerously close. Victor was adjusting faster with every exchange. Evelyn calmly removed the damaged netting without panic and shifted her rifle lower against the frozen earth. Commander, she said quietly, you have enemy movement approaching your eastern flank. 4 hostiles. Brooks immediately turned toward the canyon edge and signaled defensive positions. The operators moved quickly behind rocks while visibility continued collapsing around them. Somewhere beyond the storm, the extraction helicopter should have already arrived. But the sky above the canyon remained empty. Raven 1, Brooks asked, can you still cover us? For the first time all night, Evelyn hesitated. Not from fear. From calculation. Viktor Sokolov was no longer hunting the SEAL team. He was hunting her. Every second she spent protecting the operators below gave him another chance to locate her firing position permanently. Yet despite the danger, her answer came without emotion. Until the last round. Then high across the western ridge, a faint thermal silhouette finally stepped into clear view through her optic for less than 1 second. Tall frame. White winter camouflage. Motionless posture. Viktor Sokolov had revealed himself. The moment Viktor Sokolov stepped into view through Evelyn Carter's thermal optic, the freezing world around her seemed to narrow into silence. Wind still screamed across the mountain ridge. Snow and sand still drifted through the darkness. Radio chatter still crackled faintly beneath her headset. But none of it mattered now. After 6 years, she was looking directly at the man who destroyed her team and vanished like a ghost into classified rumors and buried military reports. Victor stood motionless between 2 jagged rocks nearly 1,300 yards away, his white winter camouflage blending perfectly against the frozen ridge line. Most shooters would never have noticed him. But Evelyn recognized the posture immediately. Calm shoulders. Stable breathing. Rifle held low instead of ready. He was not hiding from her anymore. He was acknowledging her. I have visual confirmation, Evelyn said quietly into the radio. Down below in the canyon, Commander Nathan Brooks pressed against the rocks while the SEAL team monitored the eastern ridge for enemy movement. Can you take the shot? Brooks asked instantly. Evelyn remained silent for several seconds while her gloved finger rested near the trigger guard. Through the thermal optic, Victor's silhouette barely moved despite the brutal crosswinds tearing across the mountains. He understood terrain better than anyone she had ever encountered. Even now he positioned himself where the wind currents changed unpredictably every few seconds. It was deliberate. He was forcing uncertainty into the shot. Negative, Evelyn answered softly. Not clean enough. Mason Reed looked toward Brooks in disbelief. She has made impossible shots all night. Brooks shook his head slowly. Not against someone like him. Another radio transmission suddenly broke through the storm from Falcon Base Command. Ghost Actual, this is Falcon Base. Extraction bird delayed 8 minutes due to weather conditions. Brooks closed his eyes briefly in frustration. 8 more minutes inside the canyon might as well have been 8 hours. Understood, he answered tightly. The younger operators nearby checked ammunition and repositioned along the rocks while visibility continued collapsing around them. Then Evelyn's voice cut through the comms again. Commander, enemy assault team moving toward your southern flank. Distance 400 yards and closing. Brooks immediately raised his rifle. How many? 5. Mason muttered under his breath. This whole mountain wants us dead tonight. But high above them, Evelyn no longer focused entirely on protecting the team below. Viktor Sokolov had changed the battlefield the moment he appeared. She knew how he operated. He would never attack directly while emotions controlled the fight. He would pressure. Isolate. Manipulate timing until his target made a mistake. And after 6 years, he probably expected revenge to cloud her judgment. Evelyn slowly adjusted her breathing and shifted her rifle 2 inches lower into the frozen ridge. Revenge was not part of the equation anymore. Survival was. Another suppressed shot suddenly cracked across the mountain and struck the rock inches from her optic, showering ice fragments across her gloves. Viktor was probing again. Testing reaction speed. Evelyn immediately rolled sideways behind deeper cover and disappeared from her original firing position. Almost instantly, a second shot hit exactly where her head had been moments earlier. Down below, Brooks heard both impacts through the radio static. Raven 1. No response came for 2 seconds. Then Evelyn answered calmly. Still here. Mason exhaled slowly. How is she staying that calm? Brooks stared toward the dark ridge above them. Because this is not the first time she has fought him. High on the western slope, Viktor repositioned silently through the storm while monitoring Evelyn's last known location through advanced thermal optics. He had studied her for years after the border incident. Every report. Every deployment rumor. Every classified mention buried beneath intelligence black files. Governments called Evelyn Carter a survivor. Viktor knew better. Survivors adapted. Evelyn evolved. That was why he came back. Not to eliminate her. To see if she was still worthy of the legend built around her name. Across the canyon, Evelyn steadied herself beneath a lower ridge position and recalculated wind drift again. The conditions were deteriorating fast now. Gusts reached nearly 40 miles per hour along the upper cliffs. Thermal distortion warped movement at long range. Visibility shifted second by second. Any ordinary sniper duel would have ended already. But this was no ordinary duel. Commander, Evelyn said quietly, you need to reach extraction point now. Brooks checked the terrain ahead. We still have movement on both ridges. Leave the ridges to me. Her tone carried absolute certainty again. The younger operator beside Brooks shook his head slowly. She really believes she can hold this whole canyon alone. Mason glanced upward into the storm. No, he answered quietly. She already has. Another enemy figure appeared briefly above the eastern ridge preparing to move toward the canyon floor. Before Brooks could even raise his rifle, Evelyn fired. The silhouette disappeared instantly behind the rocks. Then another shape emerged farther left. Another shot followed seconds later. Controlled. Efficient. Unshaken. Even while Viktor hunted her across the mountains, Evelyn continued protecting every operator below with terrifying precision. Brooks finally understood something important then. Evelyn was not fighting because she hated the enemy. She was fighting because she refused to lose another team. Suddenly, Viktor stepped into clear thermal view again across the western ridge. This time he remained exposed longer than before. Intentional. Evelyn centered the optic on him immediately. Wind speed fluctuated violently between their positions. Distance, 1,312 yards. Elevation drop, -19 feet. Crosswind unstable. Probability low. Viktor slowly raised his rifle toward her ridge. Not rushed. Not afraid. Almost respectful. Then through the radio, for the first time all night, Evelyn whispered words none of the SEALs expected to hear. This ends now. The freezing wind roared across the canyon as Evelyn Carter steadied her rifle against the ice-covered ridge and kept Viktor Sokolov centered inside her thermal optic. Below her, Commander Nathan Brooks and the remaining SEAL operators moved carefully through the eastern corridor toward the alternate extraction zone while enemy movement continued shifting through the cliffs behind them. The battlefield had narrowed now into something far more dangerous than an ambush. It had become a duel between two people who already knew how the other one thought. Viktor remained motionless across the western ridge, his white camouflage nearly invisible against the storm-covered rocks. Through the optic, Evelyn could see the faint outline of his rifle angled toward her position with perfect discipline. No wasted movement. No emotional reaction. Just patience. The same patience that destroyed her team 6 years earlier. Raven 1, Brooks said quietly through the comms, "We are 30 yards from extraction point." Evelyn never looked away from Viktor. "Keep moving." Another gust of wind tore across the mountains, violently shifting the snow and sand between them. The crosswind changed direction again. 38 miles per hour. Then 32. Then 40. Viktor understood exactly what the storm was doing. He was waiting for the instability to force hesitation into her calculations. Most snipers feared uncertainty. Viktor weaponized it. Evelyn adjusted her scope elevation one click lower and slowed her breathing until the sound of the storm faded into the background. She remembered another mountain. Another freezing night. Another impossible shot. Back during the border operation, after her unit was eliminated, she had spent nearly 4 hours pinned alone beneath a collapsed ridge while Viktor hunted the surviving members of her team through the blizzard. She remembered hearing his rifle before she ever saw him. Calm. Precise. Controlled. Every shot seemed to arrive exactly where fear already existed. That was Viktor's real skill. Not accuracy. Pressure. He made experienced operators panic long before he ever fired. But that version of Evelyn Carter no longer existed. "Commander," she said softly through the radio, "when extraction arrives, do not wait for me." Brooks stopped moving instantly. "Negative. You do not have enough time. I am not leaving my overwatch behind." For the first time all night, Evelyn almost smiled beneath the freezing wind. Almost. Then another suppressed shot cracked across the canyon and struck the ridge inches above her rifle barrel, sending ice fragments scattering across her gloves again. Viktor was tightening the distance between their calculations. He wanted her rushed. Emotional. Distracted. Evelyn calmly shifted 6 feet lower along the ridge and disappeared into another firing pocket beneath the rocks before chambering a fresh round. Below her, the SEAL team finally reached the alternate extraction zone hidden inside a narrow opening between canyon walls. The landing area was barely wide enough for a helicopter under perfect weather conditions. Tonight the storm made it nearly impossible. "Falcon Base, this is Ghost Actual," Brooks called into the radio. "We are at extraction point. Request immediate status update." Static hissed through the comms before a pilot finally answered. "Ghost Actual, extraction bird inbound. Estimated arrival 3 minutes. Mason Reed exhaled heavily beside him. 3 minutes in this storm feels like 3 years. Brooks looked back toward the dark ridges towering above the canyon. Somewhere out there, Evelyn was still alone against Viktor Sokolov. The realization unsettled him more than the ambush itself. Because now he understood something important. Evelyn never expected to survive this mission. She accepted it before they ever boarded the helicopters. High across the canyon, Viktor finally moved again. Slow. Deliberate. He stepped sideways between 2 rocks and exposed himself for barely 1 second before disappearing once more into the storm. But the movement was intentional. He was baiting her into firing first. Evelyn lowered her finger slightly away from the trigger. He was still testing her. That meant something else too. He respected her enough not to underestimate her anymore. Another enemy group suddenly emerged near the southern ridge below the extraction zone, moving quickly through the storm toward the trapped SEAL team. Brooks immediately raised his rifle. Contact south side. Evelyn shifted her optic instantly toward the new movement. 5 armed figures descending fast through the canyon edge. Too close now. If the helicopter arrived before the landing zone was secure, the entire extraction would collapse. "Commander," Evelyn said sharply, "hold position." Brooks immediately understood what she meant. "Can you stop them?" Evelyn checked distance and wind automatically. 840 yards downhill. Strong left crosswind. Limited visibility. Tight angle through moving snow. Difficult. Not impossible. She fired once. The lead figure vanished into the storm. Then another shot followed less than 2 seconds later. Another silhouette dropped behind the rocks. The remaining enemy fighters scattered instantly for cover, buying the SEAL team precious seconds near the landing zone. Mason stared upward into the darkness in disbelief. She is fighting an entire canyon and a ghost sniper at the same time. Brooks answered quietly without taking his eyes off the ridge. And somehow she is still winning. Then the sound finally came. Deep rotor blades cutting through the storm somewhere above the canyon. Extraction. The operators looked upward as faint navigation lights pierced the darkness through blowing snow. Relief spread across exhausted faces for the first time all night. But high above the battlefield, Evelyn's thermal optics suddenly caught movement again across the western ridge. Victor had repositioned closer. Much closer. He was no longer aiming at her. He was aiming at the incoming helicopter. The sound of the extraction helicopter echoed through the canyon while snow and sand swirled violently beneath the rotating blades somewhere above the storm. Commander Nathan Brooks stood near the landing zone with his SEAL team positioned behind the rocks, every operator scanning the ridges for movement while the aircraft struggled to descend through the brutal crosswinds. But high above them on the frozen mountain ridge, Evelyn Carter no longer focused on the helicopter itself. Her thermal optic remained locked on Viktor Sokolov. He had repositioned perfectly. Elevated angle. Stable platform. Clear line of sight toward the extraction bird as it descended into the canyon. Brooks heard Evelyn's voice immediately through the radio, sharper than before. The helicopter is his target. Mason Reed looked up toward the storm above them. Can she stop him? Brooks never answered. Because deep down, he already knew what kind of shot this would require. Evelyn steadied her breathing against the frozen ridge and recalculated everything again. Distance to Victor, 1,307 yards. Wind unstable. Visibility collapsing. Rotor turbulence beginning to distort thermal signatures across the canyon. Victor understood all of it too. That was why he waited until the helicopter arrived. He was turning the storm itself into a weapon. Through the scope, Evelyn watched him slowly settle behind his rifle. Calm. Controlled. Patient. 6 years earlier, she had feared him because she believed nobody could defeat someone who never lost composure under pressure. But tonight she finally understood the truth. Victor was not unbeatable. He was simply willing to wait longer than everyone else. The extraction helicopter descended lower between the canyon walls, navigation lights flickering through blowing snow while the pilot fought to stabilize the aircraft above the landing zone. Ghost Actual, this is Falcon 2, the pilot called through comms. You have 30 seconds. Brooks immediately signaled his operators toward the aircraft. Move. The SEAL team sprinted through the storm toward the landing zone while rotor wash blasted sand and snow across the canyon floor. High above them, Victor adjusted his rifle slightly toward the descending helicopter. Evelyn saw it instantly. He was preparing for a single precision shot through the cockpit glass once the aircraft stabilized. One round. One perfect angle. The same kind of shot she would take herself. Not this time, Evelyn whispered quietly into the freezing wind. She centered her optic on Victor's rifle position and slowed her breathing until the storm disappeared from her mind completely. No fear. No anger. No revenge. Just mathematics. Wind drift. Elevation. Distance. Timing. The younger version of Evelyn Carter might have taken the shot immediately out of emotion. The sniper she became after surviving Viktor Sokolov understood patience instead. She waited. Below her, the helicopter finally touched the canyon floor hard enough for the landing struts to scrape stone beneath the snow. Brooks pushed his operators toward the open side door while Mason covered the ridge above them. "Where is she?" one operator shouted over the rotor noise. Brooks glanced upward into the storm. Still fighting. Then suddenly Victor shifted position and aimed directly toward the cockpit. Evelyn saw the movement instantly. This was the moment. She adjusted half a click for the changing crosswind and exhaled slowly. Her finger tightened against the trigger. The rifle thundered once across the frozen canyon. For one endless second, nothing moved except blowing snow and rotor wash. Then Victor's thermal silhouette vanished backward behind the ridge line. His rifle disappeared with him. The helicopter remained untouched. Down below, Brooks looked upward toward the western ridge while the storm swallowed the echo of Evelyn's shot. Mason stared beside him in disbelief. Did she hit him? Brooks never answered because at that same moment Evelyn's voice returned through the radio one final time. "Get your team out of there." Brooks grabbed the comms immediately. "Raven 1, report." Silence answered him. The wind roared through the canyon. "Evelyn, report." Nothing. The SEAL team loaded into the helicopter while snow blasted through the open door and the pilot shouted for immediate departure. Brooks refused to move. "We are not leaving without her." Then suddenly another voice crackled through the radio. "Calm. Quiet. Exhausted. You always talk too much, Commander." Brooks closed his eyes briefly in relief. "Where are you?" High above the canyon, hidden beneath shattered camouflage netting and frozen rock, Evelyn slowly lowered herself against the ridge beside her rifle. Her gloves trembled slightly now from exhaustion and cold. The storm had finally started fading around the mountains, revealing faint moonlight breaking through the clouds overhead. Across the western ridge, Viktor Sokolov was gone. No thermal signature. No movement. Just darkness. She had no confirmation whether he survived the shot or vanished intentionally into the mountains again. Somehow, she suspected it was the second option. "Raven 1, that is an order," Brooks said firmly through the comms. "Give me your location." Evelyn looked down toward the helicopter waiting below with the remaining SEAL team gathered near the open door. Hours earlier, most of those men doubted she even belonged on the mission. Now every one of them stood waiting for the sniper they once underestimated. Slowly, Evelyn picked up her rifle and rose from the frozen ridge. "I am on my way," she answered quietly. 40 minutes later, inside the dimly lit helicopter cabin flying away from the mountains, the exhausted SEAL operators sat in silence while snow-covered gear rattled softly beneath the aircraft vibrations. Across from them, Evelyn Carter quietly cleaned ice from her rifle without looking up once. No dramatic speech. No celebration. No pride. Just calm hands methodically checking the same weapon that had kept every man in that helicopter alive. The younger operator who mocked her before the mission stared at her for several seconds before finally speaking. "Why did Command hide who you really were?" Evelyn paused briefly while sliding the bolt smoothly back into place. Then she answered in the same quiet voice she carried all night. "Because names do not save people." She looked up for the first time. Pale blue eyes steady beneath the dim cabin lights. "Skills do." Nobody spoke after that. Outside the helicopter windows, the storm slowly disappeared behind them while the mountains faded into darkness far below.